welcome to episode 24 of the Mr. Douglas Sports Show. I am your host, as always, Corey Douglas, and the Cowboys are now 2-7 after a close nail-biting loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday afternoon. But for me, this game could not have went better from a team standpoint, and for my personal choice of wanting the Cowboys to lose every single game the rest of the season to ensure they get at least a top 3 draft pick. So I've gotten a lot of questions over the last couple of weeks since I've really amped up my team tank position. The questions being from, how could you want your team to lose? The Cowboys still have a chance to win this division. And for me, I look at it as I'm looking at a team that doesn't have their quarterback, doesn't have their left tackle, doesn't have their right tackle, along with a slew of other injuries. So for me, I think it's better for a team building position for the Cowboys to get the best draft pick possible. And to get the best draft pick possible, you must lose as many games as possible. So now, I think this gets confusing because I don't want to see the Cowboys go out there and get steamrolled every week. What I want to see, especially going forward for the rest of this season specifically, I want to see who can stick around on this defense. And I definitely think these last couple of weeks against Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, I think you've seen some guys on defense step up. I think you've seen the defense play better. So for me, that's why this past game couldn't have gone better for me. So when I talk about the defense, I'm talking about 3 names that really stuck out to me this past week. I'm talking the leader of your defense, DeMarcus Lawrence. I mentioned last week he is still playing as hard as he can, and that's what you want from your highest paid guy on defense. I also look at a guy like Donovan Wilson, safety. I mentioned him last week. I think he played really well again this week against Pittsburgh. I'm looking at Randy Gregory. He stepped up in a big way. But I think the one guy that I'm most happy with from this past week is their 3rd round draft pick, Gallimore. I think he stepped up in a big way. I think for the majority of this season, he's been blocked by Dontari Poe. And now that he's getting his opportunity, I hope to see him build off of this performance against Pittsburgh. So, yes, I want the Cowboys to lose, but I'm paying close attention to the defensive guys. I think we know what we have on offense, assuming they keep Dak Prescott. We love the receivers. I think there's some question marks at running back. You have a $90 million running back who's not playing well. We'll get to that later when I hand out my midseason grades for the Dallas Cowboys to this point. But overall, I think that was a great game. One of the biggest difference from this game to last game is the quarterback play. And I was on record saying I would have just gave DiNucci another shot. Just find out what you have there. But this guy, Garrett Gilbert, came right off the street. And I think he played pretty well. If you look at his overall numbers, they're not flashy. 21 of 38, a touchdown, a pick, 243 yards passing. So like I said, not a flashy game. I think if you looked at him, he looked really in control and the moment wasn't too big for him. The previous week with Ben DiNucci, the week was definitely too big for him and it showed in his play, and that's why he didn't get the other chance. Now, because Gilbert played so well and Andy Dalton's dealing with concussion protocol and also in the COVID-19 protocol in the NFL right now, the question begs is who should the Cowboys go with going forward for this season? Andy Dalton, who's the 10-year vet, or Garrett Gilbert, who just is coming off his only start of his career? For me, this decision is kind of tough because obviously the vet is Andy Dalton, but he hasn't played well in the game and a half he's played in. And then you're coming off Garrett Gilbert, who's played really well against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So for me personally, I would stick with Gilbert, but I understand what the Cowboys are going to do, and they're going to stick with Andy Dalton, at least until later in the season when they're mathematically eliminated, because the Cowboys front office is still wanting to compete for the division this season, which I don't like it, but I understand why they are sticking with that. Now, in this game against Pittsburgh, I do think there's a couple of decisions that I don't agree with. I'll just put it that way. So there's a 4th down situation. The Cowboys are up 16-9. It's 4th and inches. They're in Pittsburgh's territory. And instead of going for it to try to go up and put a touchdown on the board to make it a 2-touchdown game, Mike McCarthy opts to kick the field goal, make it 19-9. And obviously the Cowboys don't score again. Pittsburgh rolls off 15 straight points and they go on to win the game. In that situation, if I'm Mike McCarthy, if I'm the head coach of this 2-6 football team, I am going for it to try to put your foot down and get a W there. It's easy in hindsight to go back and question the head coach. You can play Monday morning head coach every week, but in that particular situation, you have nothing to lose as a team, and I would have liked to see Mike McCarthy go for it in that situation. There was one negative that came out of the Sunday's game, and that is the injury to rookie cornerback Trevon Diggs. He suffered a broken foot, and he's expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks, but depending on how the season shakes out, his season could very well be over. So obviously that's a big loss for this year, but I also think it's a big hit to his development as a cornerback in the league. These games are important. The experience is important. So he's going to kind of be behind the 8 ball just a tad bit going into next season. Hopefully he makes a full recovery because he has suffered a broken foot in college before. So once you start racking up the foot injuries, that could, linger with you throughout your career. Hopefully not for Diggs. And then obviously Tyler Biadasz, he did not make the start Sunday after suffering some type of hamstring injury during pregame, during the national anthem. Apparently he was just standing there and then something pulled with his hamstring. So he missed Sunday's game. Joe Looney stepped in. I think he did a great job overall. So Biadasz is going to be out 2 to 3 weeks. So hopefully he can hurry back and, get back out there on the field, because his development is just as important for that offensive line. Closing out the Pittsburgh game, the Cowboys came into this week at the number 5 position in the draft. After Sunday's loss, they moved up to number 3. So now it's the Jets, Jaguars, and the Cowboys sitting at 2-7, with the Washington football team and the Giants following them at 4 and 5. So let's go ahead and transition to my Tank-a-thon games of the week for this week, week 10 in the NFL. I have 5 games to watch. Number 1, the Houston Texans traveling to the Cleveland Browns. Hopefully the 2-win Houston Texans can get a win against Cleveland and get up to that 3-win category in the NFL. My number 2 game of the Tank-a-thon game of the week is the 2-win Washington football team versus the 3-win Detroit Lions. I need the football team to bounce back from their disappointing division loss to the Giants. Number 3 on my Tank-a-thon game of the week is the Jacksonville Jags going to Green Bay and Lambeau Field to take on the 6-2 Packers. I'm not expecting a win for Jacksonville there, so we're going to go ahead and move right on to the next game, which is number 4, and that is the Eagles and Giants. Obviously, the Giants beat the Washington football team this past weekend. Now they go up against the division leader with a chance to really pull close with the Eagles to get to their 3rd win of the year. If you remember a couple weeks back, they played really well against Philadelphia, and they were an Evan Ingram drop away from possibly winning that game on the road. So hopefully the Giants can get back-to-back wins there. Then my 5th and final Tank-a-thon game of the week is the Los Angeles Chargers heading to Miami to take on the Dolphins, who have won 4 straight, and including 2 straight with Tua at starting quarterback. So I am hoping the Chargers find a way to win a game this week after just some disappointing losses. I know for their fans, they find new ways to lose every week. Hopefully not this week. That does it for my Tank-a-thon games of the week. Like I said, we want the Cowboys to keep moving on up. We want them to get this, at least secure this top 3 pick. Alright, so I mentioned I wanted to do some grades. We are just a little bit past the halfway point for the Dallas Cowboys. They played 9 games. They have 7 remaining. As I've talked about all show, they are sitting at 2-7, number 3 in the draft order. So I want to go ahead and go through some grades. I'm going to grade the front office, the coaching staff, and then each position group, while highlighting a couple of players from each position group that I think have played well, and guys that I have also not played well. So let's just go ahead and start with the front office. I'm giving them a D for this season so far. And the main reason for this D grade is their approach in free agency. You signed Everson Griffin, who I personally thought was going to be a great pickup. He was not. Dontari Poe It's been known around the NFL that he hasn't been able to play in years. You sign him, and then you sign Daryl Worley. Those three guys are all gone. So their approaching free agency was not good. And then you don't pay Byron Jones. And I'm going to go ahead and lump in the extensions of Jalen Smith and Ezekiel Elliott into this lump, because by paying Jalen Smith and paying Zeke, you basically said bye to Byron Jones. So that's another hit. The third and final thing that plays a part into this grade is the hiring of Mike McCarthy. Their approach to hiring the head coach was not a good approach. You interview Marvin Lewis, and then you interview Mike McCarthy, and then you end up hiring Mike McCarthy. That is not a head coaching search. So Marvin Lewis was just only interviewed because the Rooney Rule in the NFL, you have to interview a black head coach before you actually make your hire. And then you hire Mike McCarthy, you let him sell you on everything he did not do in his year away from football. And I don't think we've seen anything from Mike McCarthy to show that he's the guy to continue to run this program. Now, he does have 7 games left to kind of change my stance on that. But as of right now, I don't think that was a good hire. I don't think he's the right guy. And I think he's a Super Bowl winning head coach. But I think that has more to do with a prime Aaron Rodgers versus having to do with Mike McCarthy himself as a head coach. The only thing positive I have to say about this front office is it looks like they have nailed the 2020 draft. There's still a couple guys out there that we need to see play on the field, but I think if you look at the picks of CeeDee Lamb, you look at the pick of Trayvon Diggs, and then the center Tyler Biadasz, you can look at those and say you have at least 3 building blocks out of this draft. So that is why the Cowboys front office earns a D. Next up, you go to the coaching staff. And the coaching staff right now is getting a C. And there's multiple factors that play into this grade. So obviously the Cowboys have been just beaten down with injuries, which is a big part of why they are 2-7. Obviously when you lose your quarterback, you lose your left tackle and right tackle, and then you have multiple injuries on defense. You kind of get what you get with that. And you have players that weren't expected to be playing. They're playing heavy roles, so that's a big part. But like I said, Mike McCarthy, you don't just escape with that. If you look at his coaching staff and the guys he's hired, and then you look at the James Slater report from earlier this season about the turmoil that was going on in the locker room, you have to look straight at the head coach. Look who he put in position at the different position groups. You have Al Harris, a former friend. Mike Nolan, defensive coordinator, former friend of Mike McCarthy. And you just go down the list on the coaching staff, and you see Mike McCarthy, you see a bunch of Mike McCarthy friends, or childhood friends, or maybe a guy he owed a favor to for hiring him in the past. But I do think there are 2 positives on this coaching staff to this point. Kellen Moore, all things considered, like I said, the injuries and just what he's dealt with, I think he's done a damn good job. I look at John Fossil on special teams. I think he's done a hell of a job. So I would say on offense and special teams, I think the coaching is fine. I don't think there needs to be any improvements. But on defense, you definitely probably need to overhaul that staff. And that is why the coaching staff earns a C. Alright, so going ahead and moving over to the first position group, the quarterback, I have to give it an A+. Dak Prescott was off to a phenomenal start. The Cowboys have actually only scored 2 touchdowns since he got hurt. I think we learned a lot about Dak Prescott while he was playing, but I think we learned even more how good he is since he got hurt. So I'm giving the quarterback an A+. Obviously, DiNucci, he graded out as an F in the only game he played. And then Gary Gilbert, I got to give him an A. And then Andy Dalton, he gets a D. From the game and a half that we saw from Dalton, not good. So next up is the running backs. So Ezekiel Elliott, obviously the $90 million man, the starting running back for America's team, not playing good football. He doesn't have a 100-yard game this season. We've highlighted the fumbling issues he's had this season. And he just lacks explosiveness, elusiveness. Meanwhile, his backup running back has really come on, Tony Pollard, as of late. He already has more explosive plays, runs of 20 or more than Ezekiel Elliott to this point in the season. And you can just see there's a huge difference between Pollard and Zeke. And I hate to say it, but I don't think I don't think he's the starting running back long term, and I think the Cowboys are going to start looking for a way to get him out of his contract here in the next year or two. All right, so the next position group is the wide receivers, and how could you give this group anything but an A+? When you look at Amari Cooper, you look at Michael Gallup, you look at CeeDee Lamb, and then you look at Cedric Wilson and Noah Brown, this is by far the most talented position group that the Cowboys have. And mainly the top 3 receivers with Lamb, Cooper, and Gallup, they were all on pace for over 1,000 yards before the Dak Prescott injury. And obviously since the Dak Prescott injury, their numbers have all taken a dip. But going forward, you have to love this position group. So yeah, A+ for the wide receivers. Next up is the offensive line. And I'm going to give this group a C+. And the main reason I'm giving them a C+ is because the development of Tyler Biadasz, and then you look at Joe Looney and you look at Zach Martin, I think those 3 guys have played pretty well. And then when you consider the lack of Tyron Smith and Noel Collins this season, they've had their work cut out for them because they have a bad right tackle with Terrence Steele. Connor Williams cannot develop. But you look at Connor McGovern at the same time, I think the offensive line has something to build with once you get Collins healthy for sure. If the Cowboys are picking in the top 3, they'll have a chance to address that offensive line once again. Personally, I would not take an offensive lineman in the top 3 rounds of the draft because there's too many holes on this defense, which we'll get to. But overall, C+, definitely could be better, but also could be worse when you think about the circumstances the offensive line is going through. All right, and the last position group on offense before we get to defense is the tight end group. Now, this was a position that was supposed to be led by emerging star Blake Jarwin. He gets hurt week 1. Dalton Schultz is forced to step in, and he's done a magnificent job. And I think his development as a pass catcher has been elite so far this season. Once Blake Jarwin is healthy, the Cowboys have a 2-headed monster at tight end that they'll be able to use with Jarwin and Schultz. So yeah, the tight end group definitely gets an A+. So now let's go ahead and go to the defensive grades, starting with the defensive line. I'm going to give them a C. I think since getting rid of Everson Griffin and Dontari Poe, they have played a lot better football. I've mentioned some names earlier in the show. So you have DeMarcus Lawrence, you have Neville Gallimore, you have Aldon Smith, you have Randy Gregory, which are all guys that I think have played well. And I think Everson Griffin and Dontari Poe were holding this back. Now I do have one thing I want to see on this defensive line going for the rest of the season, and that's I want to see some snaps for Bradley Anae, the 5th round rookie out of Utah. He had 30 career sacks in college, can't sniff the field for whatever reason so far this season. I definitely want to see him get some action before this season's over to see what we have there. But overall, they get a C. Not great, once again, but not horrendous either. That's definitely the best position group that they have on defense, but definitely still needs to be addressed in the upcoming draft. Next up is the linebackers. Now, this has been a mess. When you talk about Jalen Smith, who you gave an extension last offseason, you talk about Van Der Esch with his injuries, and then you talk about Sean Lee with his injuries. Joe Thomas has played some inconsistent football this season. So the linebackers, they get a D. And I mentioned all the reasons just right there. Jalen Smith is not performing. If he's not committing penalties, he's out of place on defense. Van Der Esch, he's played decent when healthy, but the health is a big factor. You have to be available in order to help your team. And then obviously Sean Lee has dealt with injuries his whole career. So that's why the linebackers get a D. My last and final position group for my midseason grades is the secondary. And right now, what I've seen from the secondary, they are getting a D, and it could be an F. But I'm going to give them a break because the development of Donovan Wilson and Trevon Diggs, I think, has been pretty good. If you look at Diggs, yes, he's been beat a lot, but just look at the circumstances he's been thrown into. He's guarding the #1 receiver for the opposing team. He's the most targeted cornerback in the league because of that. But if you look at just the way he just continues to battle and fight. You need more of those guys on this defense, and I don't think they have enough of them. But then on the flip side of that, you look at the guys that are not playing good football. When you talk about Xavier Woods, you talk about Jordan Lewis, you talk about Anthony Brown. Cheeto has missed the majority of the season. There's just no playmakers back there outside of hopefully Donovan Wilson develops into one at safety and Trevon Diggs at corner. So overall, they get a D. And like I said, it could be an F, but I'm going to give them some credit for the development of Diggs and Wilson. And actually, one more thing with that secondary is, can we please get some Reggie Robinson, please? There's no reason why he shouldn't be on the field after the bye week. See what you have there. He's the 4th round pick. He's a cornerback / safety. I think his best position is cornerback. So let's kind of see what we have there. So that closes out my midseason grades. I will give you the end of season grades once the season is complete. Alright, so let's go ahead and move away from the Cowboys and let's get into the rest of the NFL with my NFL power rankings for this week. No change at 1 and 2. I still have the Kansas City Chiefs and the Pittsburgh Steelers at 1 and 2. But then that's where it gets shaky, because Seattle and Tampa Bay had ugly losses this past weekend. So coming in at number 3, I have the New Orleans Saints. What a statement win that was against Tampa Bay on Sunday Night Football. And I think they held claim to that NFC South and let Tampa Bay know they still run the NFC South. And I think that's the biggest statement win of the season to this point. Number 4, I'm moving the Green Bay Packers up. That was a bounce back win against San Francisco. Aaron Rodgers kind of took that matchup a little bit personally after getting just stomped last year twice against that team. And then number 5 to round it out, the Tampa Bay Bucks. I know they had just an ugly loss against the Saints on Sunday Night Football, but you won't see them play that poorly again this season unless maybe they play the Saints again in the playoffs. But like I said, I'm not counting on that type of performance to be rolled out there very much by the Bucks. So they come in at number 5. So to recap, number 1, KC. Number 2, Pittsburgh Steelers, who looked pretty mediocre against the Cowboys. Number 3, the New Orleans Saints. Number 4, the Green Bay Packers. And then number 5, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As we do every week on the show to close it out, let's go ahead and transition to my Week 10 NFL picks. Week 9 was much better for me than Week 8. I go 10-4, improving my record to 88-44 for the season. We get Week 10 kicked off with an AFC South division battle with the Indianapolis Colts traveling to Tennessee to take on the Titans. Give me the Titans at home in that one. Upset of the week. Give me the Houston Texans to beat the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. I think Nick Chubb is expected to be back for the Browns, but I think the Texans have enough offense to outduel the Cleveland Browns, especially because Baker Mayfield is currently in COVID-19 protocol, so he'll be doing all his work virtually. And because Baker Mayfield is not that good of a quarterback, I don't think he'll be able to overcome the lack of on-field practice reps this week. Give me the Detroit Lions to beat the Washington football team. Give me the Packers to beat the Jags. Give me the Giants to beat the Eagles. Like I said, the Giants should have beat the Eagles earlier this season. Give me the Bucks to beat the Panthers. Give me the Las Vegas Raiders to beat the Broncos. Give me the Dolphins to beat the Chargers. Give me the Arizona Cardinals to beat the Buffalo Bills. And I think that could be the best game of the week. Give me the Seattle Seahawks to bounce back against the Rams. Give me the Saints to beat the 49ers. Give me the Steelers to beat the Bengals. Give me the Ravens to beat the Patriots. And another upset of the week, give me the Minnesota Vikings on Monday Night Football to go beat the Chicago Bears. Dalvin Cook is insane right now, so I think he'll be able to do just enough against that solid Bears defense to come away with a win. That's going to do it for episode 24 of the Mr. Douglass Sports Show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, salute.